So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and this is another mechanical video. In this video I had the oil can coming on the instrument cluster display intermittently while driving on a 2015 F550 with a Powerstroke. Now the oil can coming on your display is indicating an oil pressure problem with the engine. And because you do not have an oil pressure gauge, there's no way to verify it. So this is basically your idiot light for that situation. Now this coming on your display could be anything from you being super low on engine oil. It could be a bad engine oil pressure sensor, which is what I replaced on this vehicle, and it actually rectified the problem and is most likely the cause of this situation. However, it could also be an intermittent electrical issue like a loose pigtail connection on the sensor, or a bad wire going to that pigtail on the sensor, or a bad wire further down in the harness. Or worst case scenario, a problem with the oil pump itself or the oil pressure regulator. So you do need to keep that in mind when watching this video. So this video is going to go through some basic checks that you should do if you do have this come on while you're driving, along with the full replacement guide of this sensor, along with something that I did that was really stupid, that made me look like an idiot in front of the parts place where I got the sensor from. And I am going to show you that mistake I made, so hopefully you don't go through and make the same mistake as I did. Now we are Amazon affiliates, and even though I didn't get this pressure sensor from Amazon in this case, I actually got it at a Ford dealership. I did look it up, and it is available on Amazon if you do want to get that coming, and I will put the link to it in my description. And let's get to it. So if this does happen to come up on your instrument cluster, you do need to take it very seriously, because if it is coming up because you actually do have low engine oil pressure on the engine, you could cause serious damage to your engine in a very short amount of time. So the first thing you're going to want to do if this does come on is go ahead and pull over, shut your engine down, and check the engine oil level. After checking my engine oil level and making sure it was good, which it was, once verifying the engine oil level was good, I fired up the engine. I listened for any kind of a tapping, ticking, anything abnormal from the engine noise of the vehicle. I did not hear anything. Now, if the engine is running and it does not sound right, or something does sound abnormal, I recommend shutting it down immediately and get it towed to a repair facility before causing any more damage than has already happened. Because if you do continue to run this engine with low oil pressure, there is a chance of seizing it up. A long block Powerstroke 6.7 costs around 10 grand, plus another 5 to 10 grand for somebody to install it. Now, obviously driving this with this oil can on your display, especially if it stays on there constantly, even if you do have oil in your engine, there could be a problem with the pump. So this is a risk driving it anywhere after you see this indicator light come on. Now, in my specific situation, I did decide to drive it back to our repair facility at my work. However, this was a risk because even though I had oil and I didn't hear any tapping, that doesn't necessarily mean that there was not a problem with the oil pressure. The fact that my situation, it was intermittently coming on and off at different times while driving, led me to the fact it was probably an electrical problem. If the indicator had come on and stayed on, I might have thought differently about what I decided to do. Basically what I'm saying is, don't blame my video if you decide to drive it and end up seizing up an engine after that indicator came on and trying to say that I told you it was okay to drive it still. The other thing you might end up with is a check engine light if your indicator starts coming on the instrument cluster as well, even though it didn't happen in my specific situation. Now, I did end up ordering this through a Ford dealership using the VIN number of the vehicle. Once getting the oil pressure sensor, I just took a quick look underneath the engine, and right by the oil filter, I saw a sensor, assuming that was it because it was on the oil filter housing, which obviously would have oil pressure at it. And I went ahead and started to remove that sensor. Once I removed that sensor and went to put the new sensor in, it pushed right into place because the threads were much smaller on the sensor I got than the sensor I had removed. So at that point, I got pissed off thinking Ford gave me the wrong sensor, and I went back to Ford with the video I took that you're seeing right now and said, what the hell? After the parts guys had seen my video and looked a little confused, they went and got one of the service techs at Ford, and the service tech said that I replaced the wrong sensor. The oil pressure sensor is on the front side of the oil filter housing. You tried replacing the oil temperature sensor. At which point I had to apologize for being a dumbass and had to go replace the correct sensor that I already had. Now, in my defense, when I went to replace that sensor, it was pitch black outside because I was doing it right before going to work at about 4:30 in the morning. And I didn't see the fact that there was another sensor on the front side of that oil filter housing, which is the oil pressure sensor. The oil temperature sensor is on the back of the oil filter housing. Now, in order to replace the sensor on the front side of the oil filter housing, which is a lot more of a pain in the ass than the oil temperature sensor on the back, it is a 13/16 wrench, and I did use a shorty just because of the lack of space that I had to work. Now, obviously, before being able to use that wrench to remove the sensor, you do need to unplug the pigtail. On the pigtail harness, there is going to be a plastic tab that you need to squeeze or depress in order to get it underneath the locking tab that is on the sensor. This can be a little frustrating just because you don't have much room to work with where it is at on the vehicle.
Pain in the ass.
Once I finally got that pigtail off of that sensor, then I just grabbed my 13/16 stubby wrench and got it in there to loosen that sensor and remove it from the vehicle. Once removing that sensor, I went ahead and threaded the new sensor in. You don't have to worry about any type of a pipe tape or anything like that because it does come pre-coated with a sealant on the threads. Another thing to keep in mind is you are threading this into an aluminum oil filter housing, and if you over tighten it, there is a chance you could crack that aluminum housing. That's another reason I used the stubby wrench, so I did not have as much leverage. So if you are using a full-size wrench, do be careful that you do not over tighten this sensor. This is kind of off subject, but I'm going to give you an example of why I warn you about that. A guy that used to work for me back in the day, a long time ago, was replacing the reverse oil pressure sensor on a Allison transmission, and he over tightened that and actually cracked the housing of that transmission because pipe thread is tapered, and if you over tighten it, bad things can happen. Now, I don't think Ford has an actual torque spec for this sensor, but it is a 1/4 inch national pipe thread, and the kind of a general rule of thumb for a 1/4 inch national pipe thread torque is 10 to 15 foot-pounds. Now, what I would recommend is feel the amount of force it took you in order to remove that sensor, and then tighten it down just a little less than the amount of force it took you in order to remove it. Because over time, things tend to seize up and get a little harder to remove, so that's why I say just use a little bit less than the amount of force it took you in order to remove it. When plugging in any electrical pigtail, make sure you hear the little detent of the locking tab locking into place. And that's about all there is to it, guys. Ever since replacing that sensor, I have not had the oil can come on the display at all, and it's been about a month. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible so I don't waste your time. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.